The evening air carried the scent of rain-soaked dust and fried onions drifting from the neighbor's window. Mariam stood barefoot on the cracked porch boards of her mother's narrow house, her arms wrapped tightly around her rounded belly. The porch light flickered weakly, buzzing like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or give up entirely. Inside, her mother's voice cut through the thin screen door like a blade. "You see now. Didn't I tell you? That man left you high and dry, Mariam." Mariam lowered her head. The rough wood beneath her feet bit into her skin, but she didn't move. Her mother, Naomi, stepped out onto the porch, still in her work uniform, creased scrubs and weary eyes that spoke of too many double shifts. She crossed her arms and stared her daughter down. "All that talk about love, about faith, about that rich boy who said he'd marry you," Naomi continued. "Where is he now? You're the one standing here alone, belly full and promises empty." Mariam tried to answer, but her throat felt tight. "Mama, he didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" Naomi interrupted sharply. "Didn't mean to make you a fool in front of this whole street? Didn't mean to vanish after filling your head with dreams? Please." She scoffed, turning away with a frustrated shake of her head. The sound of the neighbor's TV carried faintly through the thin walls. Some game show laughter, clashing with the heaviness of Mariam's silence. Mariam's heart beat so loud it filled her ears. She wanted to explain that Dante had loved her, that what they shared wasn't some foolish fantasy. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, even she wasn't sure anymore. Naomi sighed, softening for a brief second as she studied her daughter's trembling hands. "You were always a smart girl," she said, her voice gentler now. "But you let love blind you. I raised you better than that." Mariam swallowed hard. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of her mother. She looked past the porch rail, toward the narrow street, lined with rusted mailboxes and dented cars. The sun had already dipped low, leaving the world cloaked in dull orange light. "I still believe in him," Mariam finally said, barely above a whisper. "He wouldn't just walk away." "Not like that." Naomi gave a dry chuckle that wasn't amusement at all. "You believe what you want, baby. But love don't pay rent, and faith doesn't fix foolish choices. You better start thinking about what comes next. Because that man you're waiting on, he's not coming back." Her words landed heavy, final. Naomi turned toward the door, muttering something under her breath about hard-headed. Girls and heartbreak, when the faint sound of an engine rose from down the block. It started as a low hum, steady, distant. Mariam's attention shifted, her heart tripping in rhythm with the approaching sound. Naomi paused too, glancing down the dimly lit street. Headlights swept across the cracked asphalt, casting sharp lines of light against the worn houses. The vehicle's engine was deep, powerful, too refined for their side of town. Naomi frowned. Who on earth drives that kind of car down here? Mariam said nothing. Her pulse quickened. She stepped closer to the edge of the porch, gripping the rail. The glow grew brighter, the engine louder. Within seconds, the unmistakable grille of a Rolls-Royce emerged from the darkness, its silver hood gleaming beneath the streetlight. The car slowed, its tires whispering against the road before coming to a stop right in front of their house. The neighborhood fell silent. No barking dogs, No buzzing TVs. Just the hum of that luxury machine, idling like it didn't belong there. Naomi blinked, her mouth slightly open. What kind of... She started, then looked at her daughter, suspicion and confusion flickering across her face. Mariam's hands trembled as she clutched her belly. The last time she'd seen that kind of car, she'd been smiling beside Dante, thinking the world finally made sense. Now, as the car door opened and a polished black shoe stepped out, her breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to hold its breath too. Naomi took an uncertain step toward the edge of the porch. Her arms dropped from her chest, no longer crossed but hanging awkwardly at her sides. Her voice, moments ago so firm and biting, now faltered. Do you know who that is?" she asked. Mariam couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hands moved to her stomach, instinctively shielding the child within. The low growl of the engine hummed steadily in the background, contrasting the eerie quiet that now blanketed the block. The front door of the Rolls-Royce cracked open with a soft click. Naomi squinted. "Must be someone lost," she muttered, though she didn't sound convinced. "No one with that kind of car has any reason to stop here." But Mariam didn't move. Her chest rose and fell as if she'd just run a mile. Her skin tingled with apprehension, confusion, and the tiniest flicker of hope. The kind of hope that sneaks in, even when you're afraid to feel it. She gave her heart to a man who had everything: power, status, a future already mapped out. And then he left her with nothing but silence and shame. The world laughed. Even her own mother mocked her. But right now, that world has paused, because something or someone is back. Across the street, curtains twitched. Porch lights blinked on one by one as curious neighbors peeked out their windows. An expensive car like that didn't just pull up without making noise, even if the engine barely whispered. A child on a bicycle stopped and stared. The neighborhood hadn't seen a vehicle like this in years, if ever. Naomi's voice returned, sharp now. "If this is some stunt from that boy, Mariam, I swear." Mariam shook her head, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. He didn't say anything." Have you ever been judged for believing in love? For trusting someone when everyone around you told you not to? She was told she was foolish, naive, blind, that a man like Dante would never choose someone like her. And maybe they were right. Or maybe they were just too afraid to believe in something real. The car door opened fully now. Naomi clutched her robe tighter, her spine stiffening. Mariam stood frozen, trying to prepare herself for whatever, or whoever, was about to emerge. For a long second, nothing happened. Just the open door, waiting. The stillness was unbearable. Mariam's fingers pressed against her belly. The baby shifted inside her, a soft, timed movement that reminded her of why she'd held on for so long, why she hadn't given up. She was pregnant, broke, and standing on the edge of faith. Alone, but not abandoned. Not completely, because faith, even the smallest grain of it, had carried her through the worst nights. Behind her, Naomi whispered, Who would drive a car like that around here? Mariam didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the open door. The light above the porch flickered again. A cool breeze pushed through the block, ruffling the hem of Mariam's dress. A voice, clear, familiar, and devastatingly real, cut through the night. Mariam? Naomi sucked in her breath. Mariam blinked hard. The voice came from inside the car. A figure shifted. What if love didn't give up? What if it returned, against all odds, in a way no one saw coming? What if your worst heartbreak became the beginning of your greatest breakthrough? The shadow stepped forward. Naomi's mouth dropped open. She gripped the porch railing so tight, her knuckles turned white. Mariam gasped softly. Her knees wobbled, but she stood her ground. This story didn't start with a luxury car. It started with a lecture, a thunderstorm, and a night that changed everything. To understand how Mariam got here, we have to go back to when she first met him. If you've ever believed in a love that everyone else said was impossible, or if you've ever been counted out, mocked, or left behind, this story is for you. Stay with us to see how Mariam's journey unfolds and how faith, love, and unexpected grace can rewrite even the most painful beginnings. Before we begin, hit that like button so YouTube knows this story matters. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And drop a comment if you've ever had to fight for love. Don't forget to subscribe. We've got something powerful to share with you. 6 months earlier, South Atlanta, Georgia. The city was alive in its usual rhythm. Buses wheezing at intersections, corner stores, buzzing with school kids grabbing snacks, and church bells chiming from down the block. Mariam hurried across the university courtyard, balancing a beat-up leather bag on one shoulder and a coffee in her hand that had already lost most of its heat. Her curly hair bounced in a high puff, and her denim jacket was patched at the elbows, a small rebellion against her school's sea of business blazers. She was late. Again. She cut through the Fountain Plaza, sidestepping skateboarders and a pop-up voter registration booth. As she passed the chapel steps, she slowed just long enough to nod respectfully at the old pastor handing out mini pamphlets. "God bless you, baby," he said, smiling. "Thank you, Pastor Green," she called over her shoulder, breath catching as she broke into a jog. This was Mariam, 22, black, first-generation college student, business major, with a dream of starting a non-profit for inner-city teens. Her part-time job at the campus financial aid office barely covered rent. Sundays were reserved for New Light Baptist, her second home, and in the spare few minutes she had left each day, she prayed, not for luxury, not even for love. She prayed for strength, for endurance, for favor, because she knew what it was like to struggle, to walk past payday loan shops and boarded-up storefronts and still believe there was something greater for her out there. Her mother's sacrifices had taught her that. "Keep your head up, Mariam," Naomi always said. "Work twice as hard, pray 3 times harder, and never let a man distract you from your purpose." So she did. Not really. Until that day. Mariam reached the lecture hall just as the dean was giving the introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Dante Whitman." She slipped into a seat in the back row, trying not to draw attention as she caught her breath. The room hushed, and that's when she saw him for the first time. He didn't look like he belonged, not because he was white. The school had plenty of diversity on brochures, if not always in practice. No, it was something else. Dante Whitman wore a tailored navy suit that looked custom-made. His shoes gleamed. His posture was too polished. His watch was the kind of thing you only saw in jewelry store ads. Yet when he spoke, his voice was calm, focused, not rehearsed like most rich men who come to give motivational talks. "I'm not here to tell you how to get rich," Dante said, pacing slowly. "I'm here to ask what you'll do once you are." That line made a few students chuckle, but Mariam squinted, curious. "See, my family has money," he continued. "Old money. But I've realized that wealth isn't the legacy I want to leave behind. I want to use business to build impact, real, measurable change, especially in places the corporate world tends to ignore." Mariam's eyebrows lifted. She'd heard a lot of slick talkers over the years, especially politicians on campaign stops. But something about Dante's delivery, it wasn't flashy. He seemed like a man trying, really trying, to say something honest. Still, she wasn't sold yet. When the Q&A began, most students lobbed softball questions. How do I build generational wealth? What apps do you use to track investments? What's your morning routine? Mariam raised her hand. You talked about creating change in underserved communities, she said, voice steady. But isn't that a little hypocritical, coming from someone whose family profits off gentrification and high-end real estate? The entire room turned. Dante paused, and then he smiled. That's a fair point, he said, nodding. My family has done business that I don't always agree with. That's part of why I'm here. I'm trying to do it differently. Mariam leaned back in her seat, intrigued. For once, a rich man didn't get defensive. He answered with humility. She didn't know it then. But that moment, a single question in a sea of flattery, was the spark. The lecture ended with polite applause, and the usual scramble of students rushing for selfies, handshakes, and name-dropping. Dante smiled and nodded like a seasoned pro, but his eyes kept flicking toward the back row. Toward her. Mariam didn't linger. She gathered her bag, stuffed her notebook away, and began heading toward the exit. She wasn't star-struck. She wasn't trying to get noticed. She'd asked her question, gotten her answer, and that was enough. She had a shift at the library front desk in less than an hour, and no time to be charmed. Still, she paused at the refreshments table near the exit, pouring herself a plastic cup of fruit punch, the kind that tasted more like syrup than juice. As she reached for a napkin, another hand reached for the same cup. Their fingers brushed. Oops. My bad, came the voice. She looked up. It was him, Dante Whitman. In a room full of tailored smiles and empty flattery, he had walked straight to the one woman who challenged him. You asked the gentrification question, right? He said. Mariam nodded. Was it too much? No. It was honest, he replied, which is rare. He looked genuinely curious. Mind if I ask your name? She hesitated, then extended her hand. Mariam. Dante, he said, even though she obviously knew. He chuckled. Sorry. Old habit. They stood there a moment longer, sipping their drinks like two awkward freshmen, instead of a billionaire's heir and a girl trying to keep her lights on. Your answer surprised me, she admitted. Dante tilted his head. Good or bad surprise? Still deciding, Miriam smirked, and Dante laughed. Their banter was natural. There was no force, no trying too hard. Miriam made a passing joke about his shoes looking too clean to have walked any real Atlanta pavement. Dante countered with a grin, pointing out that she'd pronounced entrepreneur correctly, which was more than he could say for half the business school. Minutes passed, then 20. They talked about school, their families, their dreams. Miriam told him about growing up in South Atlanta, the local corner store where she used to do her homework after school, while her mom worked late shifts at the hospital. Dante listened, asking real questions, not out of pity, not with that overcompensating guilt she sometimes saw from rich white people trying too hard to relate. No, he listened because he was interested. I want to start a non-profit, she said, her voice steady, for kids from my neighborhood. Help them get to college, navigate applications, financial aid, interviews, the whole mess. I didn't have anyone to guide me. She paused. Except my mom. That's powerful, Dante said, and smart. You're not just chasing money. You're building something. Miriam glanced sideways. Aren't you supposed to be the one building things? You'd be surprised how many people in my world build businesses that don't help anyone. He said it lightly, but there was something underneath. Something tired. What about you? She asked. What would you do if you weren't, you know? Dante Whitman. Dante looked surprised by the question. He stared at his cup for a moment. I'd probably be a teacher, he said quietly. High school. History, maybe. Miriam blinked. Seriously? He nodded. I like stories, real ones. Stories of struggle, of resilience, stuff they don't teach in prep schools. A beat passed. You're not what I expected, she said. You're exactly what I didn't expect, he replied, watching her closely. Outside, thunder rumbled. Miriam checked her phone. The shuttle she usually caught had already left, and the dark clouds rolling in didn't look promising. You have a ride? Dante asked. She shook her head. Nah. I live off campus. I'll call an Uber. Good luck getting one in this weather, he said, nodding toward the window. Rain had started. Light at first, then harder. A bolt of lightning flashed. The lights flickered once, then twice. You okay staying a bit? He asked. I was going to wait the storm out anyway. Miriam hesitated. She had no umbrella, no coat, and no desire to get soaked. She looked around. Most students were already gone. The building was growing quieter by the second. I guess I can wait, she said, trying not to sound nervous. Come on, he said, motioning down the hall. There's a lounge downstairs. Usually empty this late. You've been here before. 3 times, he said. Twice for speaking, once for fundraising. I know the good hiding spots. She followed him. Down the hall. Down the stairs. The power flickered again, casting long shadows on the hallway walls. She didn't know it then, but this was the moment everything began to shift. Not with a kiss, not with promises, but with the decision to trust. By the time they reached the lower level of the business building, thunder was cracking like the sky itself had something to say. The hallway lights blinked again. Not quite an outage, but definitely not stable either. Dante reached a door with a faded label. Student Lounge. East Wing. He tried the handle. It clicked open. Lucky, he said, pushing the door wide. Inside was a forgotten little room with mismatched furniture. 2 worn sofas, a few folding chairs, and a scratched-up coffee table. Posters for past events curled at the corners on the walls. There was even a mini kitchenette with a broken microwave and an unplugged mini-fridge. But most important, it was dry, quiet, safe. Mariam stepped in slowly, shaking the rain from her jacket sleeve. "Wow," she said. "This is not terrible." Dante grinned. "That's a glowing review." He pulled out his phone. "Power's going out soon. No cell service either. This storm's serious." Mariam set her bag on the couch and exhaled. "Looks like we're stuck." A strong gust of wind rattled the windows. The power flickered again, and this time it died. Darkness. Total. For a moment, neither of them moved. Dante clicked on his phone's flashlight, casting a narrow beam of light through the gloom. He opened a cabinet, and to both their surprise, found a small emergency box, candles, a flashlight, and even a faded checkers board. "Whoever stocked this deserves a raise," he muttered. He lit 2 candles and set them on the table. The flickering glow softened the room. "Okay," he said, motioning to the couch. "We wait it out." Mariam hesitated. It wasn't about trust, not exactly, but it was still new. He was still new. They'd only just met hours ago. Yet here she was, alone with him, in a candlelit room while a storm raged outside. But he wasn't trying anything. No suggestion in his eyes. No false charm. He just sat down and stretched his long legs in front of him, like someone who hadn't had a break in weeks. "So," he said, turning toward her, "what made you ask that question?" "About my family and gentrification." Mariam sat too, tucking one leg beneath her. "Because it's real. The places your family builds. They replace people like me, like my mom. We lose homes, history, not just buildings." Dante nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I want to do it differently. My dad doesn't always listen, but I'm trying to shift the way we operate. I want to fund affordable housing. I pitched it last year." They smiled and changed the subject. Mariam raised a brow. "So you're the rebel billionaire?" He laughed. If only. More like the polite disappointment. Mariam gave him a side glance. "So why don't you just walk away? Start your own company?" He looked at her, his eyes darker now. "Because I'm engaged." That landed with a weight neither of them expected. Mariam blinked. "Oh, wow. It's complicated," he added quickly. It's not about love. It's a business arrangement. Families, connections, all that. But you agreed to it. Dante nodded, then looked away. I did. I wasn't strong enough to say no. Silence. Mariam adjusted the blanket she'd pulled around her shoulders. Her voice dropped. You ever been so scared of disappointing someone that you forgot about yourself? Dante looked at her sharply. Every day. And just like that, the space between them changed. Not romantic, not yet, but honest, raw. Two people who, despite wildly different lives, carried the same weight of expectation. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, two strangers sat in a dark room, finding light in each other. The storm showed no sign of letting up. Lightning lit the lounge windows every few seconds. Each flash painted Dante's face in quick, ghostly strokes. The sharp lines of his jaw, the furrow in his brow when he was deep in thought. Mariam tucked herself deeper into the blanket, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. So, she asked, softly breaking the silence, how does someone raised in a world of marble floors and private jets end up caring about the forgotten? Dante didn't answer immediately. Because I've been forgotten too, he finally said. Not in the same way, but in my family, I'm not a person. I'm a placeholder, a groomed heir. My voice doesn't matter unless it echoes theirs. Mariam tilted her head, surprised by his openness. And your fiancée, Penelope, he said, with a half shrug. She's efficient, elegant, trained for high society. Our parents agreed to it when we were still in college. Sounds cold. It is. Another flash of lightning revealed the crease in his forehead. The U. Way his hand tightened briefly into a fist before he relaxed again. Do you love her? Mariam asked. He didn't flinch. No, she nodded slowly, unsure how to feel. She knew she shouldn't care. They barely knew each other. And yet, Dante turned to her, his expression softening. You know, something, he said. Tonight, talking to you. This is the first time in a long while I felt like I could just breathe. Mariam smiled gently. That's kinda sad. Maybe. But it's also honest. He leaned back against the sofa and closed his eyes briefly. You ever feel like your life is moving, but you're not the one steering? Mariam gave a short laugh. Every day. Especially when my rent's due and I'm eating ramen with hot sauce trying to pretend it's gumbo. Dante laughed. Really laugh. Not the polite chuckles he gave during the Q&A earlier. That's what I like about you, he said. You don't sugarcoat anything. No time for that, she said. Truth's already sweet when it's real. Another clap of thunder made the room tremble. She jumped. You okay? Dante asked. Yeah, she said, trying to cover her reaction with a smile. Storms. And I have a complicated relationship. Come here, he said, lifting the other side of the blanket. She hesitated. I won't bite, he added, unless you ask. She laughed, but slid closer. The warmth of his body surprised her. Strong, calm, steady. They sat like that, shoulder to shoulder, the flicker of candles throwing soft light on the walls. Time slowed. Mariam looked up at him. "What if your family never accepts someone like me?" she asked suddenly. "What if I'm just a story you tell yourself to feel different?" Dante's eyes locked on hers. "You're not a story. You're a wake-up call." She looked away, but he caught her chin gently, guiding her gaze back to his. "Mariam, tonight may have started with lightning, but its ending was something I never expected. Peace, a beat past, and maybe something else," he said, eyes flicking to her lips. "Maybe," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, soft, searching. No music, no fanfare, just two people in the middle of a storm, finding each other in the quiet. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And when they finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, Mariam whispered something she'd never admitted to anyone. "That was my first kiss." Dante froze. "Wait, ever?" She nodded. "I've been careful." Dante looked at her with something deeper than admiration. "I'll be careful with you," he said softly. She smiled, leaning into him. The storm outside still roared, but inside that tiny lounge, the world had shifted. Something new had taken root, something both fragile and unshakable. Morning sunlight crept through the slatted blinds. For a moment, Mariam didn't move. Her cheek rested against Dante's chest, the steady rhythm of his breathing grounding her. She could hear the soft hum of electricity again. The power had returned. The storm had passed. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the brightness. Last night hadn't been a dream. The blanket still lay tangled around them. The melted candle had formed a pool of wax on the coffee table. Her clothes were slightly rumpled. Her heart still racing. She sat up gently. Dante stirred beside her. "Hey," he said, his voice low and warm. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah. Just letting it all sink in." He smiled and ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here." "Me neither," she whispered. Silence settled between them. Not awkward, not uncertain, just quiet. The room looked different in daylight, less enchanted, more mundane. The kind of place that held leftover pizza boxes and forgotten textbooks. But for Mariam, it had become something else. "You hungry?" Dante asked, stretching. "Only if you're buying," she teased. "Always," he said. "Just maybe nothing that requires a reservation. My card's still recovering from that Uber Black I took last week." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, billionaire problems." "Former billionaire," he joked. They cleaned up the room as best they could, blowing out candles, folding the blankets, setting chairs back in place. By the time they stepped out into the crisp morning, the sun was out in full, as if the storm had never happened. The sidewalks sparkled with leftover rain. The air smelled like wet pavement and tree bark. Mariam walked beside him, her steps a little slower, her thoughts a little louder. What now? What happens when the storm is gone, and all you have left is the memory of one night that felt like a whole world. Dante unlocked his car. A sleek black Mercedes parked under a tree. It looked out of place on campus, even more so than he did. He opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in, adjusting the seatbelt around her belly. She hadn't even realized how sore her body felt until she sat down. "This feels like the end of a movie," she said, watching the campus buildings disappear through the window. "Maybe it's just the beginning," he said. The drive to her neighborhood was quiet but not heavy. They passed corner stores, beauty salons with open signs flipped backward, and a mural of Rosa Parks and John Lewis painted across a brick wall. Mariam stole a glance at Dante. He didn't seem uncomfortable. "You've never been over here before, have you?" she asked. "No," he admitted. "But I like it. Most people just lock their doors and pretend they don't see us. I see you." That landed deep. She looked back out the window, hiding the sudden rush of emotion behind a slight smile. When they reached her apartment, Dante parked carefully, avoiding the pothole near the curb like he'd been there a dozen times. He walked her to the door. "So, should I call you? Text? Send a carrier pigeon?" he asked, half joking. "Smoke signals," she replied with a straight face. Then, softening, "Text is good." He grinned. "Cool." They stood in front of her door for a beat too long. "Last night was—" he began. "Yeah," she said. "It really was." He stepped forward and kissed her forehead, gentle, without expectation. "I'll be in touch," he promised. "I'll be waiting," she whispered. She closed the door behind her, leaned her back against it, and exhaled. The apartment was quiet. No Naomi, no judgment, just Mariam, the echo of his touch, and a heart full of questions she wasn't sure how to ask. She walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. He was still outside, just sitting in his car. Eventually, he drove off, and Mariam whispered to herself, "Please don't let last night be the last time." Mariam adjusted the strap of her leather book bag, the weight of textbooks pulling hard on her shoulder. The sidewalk beneath her Converse was cracked and uneven. The wind nipped at the hem of her denim jacket, and the rush-hour traffic screamed from both ends of the block. It was just another Monday in South Atlanta. She crossed in front of the old corner store, the same one she and her cousins used to run into after Sunday service for push-pops, and now and laters. The mural of Martin Luther King Jr. on the side had faded some, but the quote beneath it still shined. "Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase." That quote stayed with her. It was the kind of faith her mother, Naomi, lived by, and the kind Mariam had tried to live by too. At 22, Mariam was a senior at Atlanta Metro University, majoring in business leadership and community development. She wasn't the loudest student or the most popular, but people noticed her because she moved with purpose. Even when things were hard, she carried herself like someone who expected more from the world and more from herself. Her life was a careful balance: early morning classes, afternoon shifts at the financial aid office, night classes, weekend tutoring, and volunteering at her church's youth outreach. She still made time to braid her little cousin's hair on Saturdays and FaceTime her grandma every Wednesday. She wasn't chasing clout. She was chasing change. "You've got vision, baby," her pastor once told her. "Don't let this world blur it." And she wouldn't. Every day, Mariam walked past shuttered businesses and liquor stores to get to campus. She knew what it felt like to live paycheck to paycheck, to pray before swiping a card at the grocery store. She also knew that the system didn't make space for girls like her. So she decided to make space herself. With a passion for equity in education, she dreamed of starting a non-profit one day, a program that would help high school students from low-income neighborhoods prepare for college. She'd already mapped out the business plan. All she needed was capital and maybe a few miracles. Miriam's faith wasn't flashy. She didn't quote scripture in every sentence or post devotionals on social media, but she prayed every morning, every night, quiet, intimate, deliberate. It kept her anchored, grounded, whole. She didn't go looking for love, not because she didn't want it, but because she didn't have time for distractions. Life had taught her that some kinds of love come wrapped in sweet talk and false promises. She'd seen it with her mother, with her friends, and in her own past. So Mariam kept her guard up, her heart locked up tighter than Fort Knox. But all of that was about to change, starting with one unexpected invitation. Dante Whitman looked out the tinted window of the Escalade as it pulled up to the university gates. His suit jacket rested neatly beside him, his collar loosened slightly. On his lap was a leather folio filled with neatly typed talking points. He hadn't read them, not because he didn't care, but because he already knew what they said. Legacy, innovation, opportunity, investment, impact. Same words, different day. He exhaled slowly and stepped out into the bright morning sun. A student volunteer greeted him with a nervous smile, holding a university-branded umbrella. "Welcome, Mr. Whitman. We're honored to have you." "Thanks. Just Dante's fine," he said, offering a polite smile as he tucked his hands into his slacks. At 27, Dante was the golden boy of the Whitman Group, a multi-generational real estate empire with skyscrapers, shopping districts, and luxury housing projects spanning 6 states. His father, David Whitman, was a man obsessed with control. His mother, Marianne, with appearances. Dante. He was still figuring it out. He'd graduated from Stanford with top honors, interned in Dubai, shadowed senior executives, and even sat on non-profit boards. On paper, he was a success story. In his soul, he felt like a ghost inside a gilded mansion. From the outside, his life looked perfect. Designer clothes, private jets, high-profile events, and an engagement to Penelope Hanover, the daughter of a New York senator and an art collector. The pairing made sense. She was brilliant, composed, and raised with the same kind of expectations he was. But love was nowhere in that arrangement. He didn't hate Penelope, but they didn't make each other laugh. They didn't argue passionately or dream wildly. They didn't challenge each other's beliefs. They simply aligned. And Dante had begun to hate alignment. That's why, when the Whitman Foundation encouraged him to speak at smaller universities about entrepreneurial development, he said yes, not because he needed the PR, but because maybe Just maybe he'd hear something real. That morning, as he walked through the campus courtyard, he felt the difference instantly. No marble floors, no valet service, just students in hoodies and backpacks, huddled under trees, professors scribbling formulas on